All right, do you think of anything else you need? I put it on back so I'm reading. It's good to put this. I feel like you might come up there. Let me go for it. No, you're right. What do you want to do here? This one. I can edit it.
Just do it. Just trust yourself. That's what it looks like. good?
There's an extension cord there.
You got one, so right?
Hi,
Hey, Mama.
how are you?
Oh, I'm good. How are you?
Bye-bye.
Bye, Mama.
documentary?
What documentary? No,
Because that's the title of a documentary.
that's a slideshow.
Oh, yeah.
No, I was surprised because I thought that you would have. You would have that.
Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Yesterday, they had a thing, like, I used it, they're just some photos. And so I've never used one, this is the NASA, this is where you put it. So of course I screwed it up right away. I'm like, oh great. Can I just hold it?
You can. I have one set up for if anyone wants to ask questions.
No, I usually just.
But this, if we have that kid.
If anyone wants to ask questions, I have one microphone. You want to just hold that microphone or?
And these are what grade? Martinez, come.
Pardon?
You know my sister lives, right?
Daisy, what grade are these?
Like, she said she ordered it, didn't get it. Can you hold it over there, just ask them to print it out?
I didn't do all of them.
I don't even know.
I'm making sure that it was wrong.
Because I believe, yeah.
All of it, all looking at you. They're all looking at you.
I think that's the only one I'm missing. The kids don't get cuts.
And you want a copy of this when it's all done?
Yeah?
You want a copy of this when it's all done? Because I'm going to record it as well.
Oh, sure, yeah, I'd love to.
Because I never cared about it. I didn't know humanity project. No one here for work.
Yes, I will. Actually, I might not even ask you. As soon as I'm finished recording, it's available.
Okay.
So I'll send it to you.
Guys, try to get the front row. Let's go.
Hey guys, everybody move up. Fill in all the empty seats, please.
Charles, shit you think about. I just did Charles,
Fill in all the empty
Charles,
seats.
I did like a chicken without a head seats, like yesterday morning. We didn't know we get to 3:30 just figuring out how to get the stream out.
Yeah?
Yeah. seated. Yes. Ask a question.
What? Do I know any? Me? Oh, I get you. It's probably like, yeah. You know how some English they're doing like this? Like they'll be reading Algernon and then others like Green Julius Caesar. I guess it's like that. So lady all the time?
No, only the lady. Only the lady. Huh? Yes, tightest shot as possible. You know, if you can fit it in, like if somebody over here asks a question, you can have a shot where you can see the person and see her in the shot. That's cute too. That's cute too. Okay? And no jagged stuff. No jagged, you know, like you'll zoom in, stop. If you're gonna zoom out, you can zoom, don't like, It's not sexy. Alright?
We'll practice that right now. Week, bro. How many days? 7? 7? camera, you just kind of like, you know, you gotta guide it, right? Yeah. To make it smooth.
Morning, guys. I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Her name is Maud Dahme. She's the golden child of the Holocaust. I got to meet her this past summer when it was part of a summer seminar. And her and I basically became good friends. So I'm glad and so appreciative that she was able to come today to speak to you guys. Okay?
Good morning. Good morning. I am so delighted to be here. It was, I thought I was going to the other end of the world. I live in Hunterdon County, and everything was fine until I hit Route 3. Oh, my goodness. Anyway, I'm delighted to be here today and share with you my story of the Holocaust. As you can see, it says the hidden child. I was hidden during the war. But before I start, I just want to read you this. You've all watched 60 Minutes. That's on Sunday evenings, and they usually have a program on something or somebody, and then the following week, parts of letters will appear that people have written into the previous week's program. And this appeared. The following appeared on CBS 60 Minutes on March 29, 1981. It appeared a week after a story on Raoul Wallenberg. Raoul Wallenberg was helped many Jews during the war. And this is the quote. The Jews of Europe were not exterminated in gas chambers. The gas chambers were wartime propaganda fantasies. And it was signed by a woman named Sophie Laley in Annandale, New Jersey, somebody I happen to know. And I was just so shocked. This is 1981. We all know that there were concentration camps at that time. Now, I was never in a concentration camp, but I was hidden as a child with my sister. So I'm going to read you this just so you get some idea of what was written about it. And it's called Facing Memories, the Silent No More. Years of life beyond almost certain death. Who would have thought that we would live to see this day, given such overwhelming odds? For most of those years, child survivors had lived in silence. Silence served us well while hiding. Survival so often depended on not being noticed, being inconspicuous, on the ability to suppress tears and ignore pain. Grief was born in silence. Silence is the language of the child survivor. We might have talked after the war, but adults persuaded us to get on with life, forget the past. Adults who themselves had survived and suffered so much, inadvertently diminished the experiences of the children. In the aftermath, in that silence, which involved our existence, what needed saying was not said. And that was so true, because that's exactly what also happened with my parents. After the war, we were fortunate to be reunited. They too said, we have to go on with life. Now let me tell you my story. I lived in the Netherlands. Sometimes it's also called Holland. And I lived there with my father and my mother, and I have a little sister who's 2 years younger. We're both not so little anymore, but anyway, my mother had come from Germany. She had come to the Netherlands, country right next door, for a party or something, and she met my father, and they fell in love, and got married, and here I am. My dad learned to be a chef because my Dutch grandfather in my hometown called Amersfoort had a restaurant near the train station, and my dad learned to be a chef so he could work for his father. And they also had a kiosk at the train station. It's not like a kiosk you see here. A kiosk there was more like a newspaper stand. It was a little building where they sold newspapers, magazines, cigars, cigarettes. And we lived a very idyllic life. My parents, my mother's parents, my German grandparents, lived in a town called Frankfurt am Main in Germany, where my German grandfather was the cantor at the synagogue. And as you know, Hitler rose to power, and things started to happen in Germany against the Jews. My parents, the more they heard, the more concerned they got, and they really felt that maybe my mother's parents, my German grandparents, should come and live with us. After all, the Netherlands was going to remain neutral, and they would be safe. Many, many German Jews saw the writing on the wall and left the country in any direction just to get out of there. Many came to the Netherlands because they had friends or relatives. But there were many, many Jews that arrived in the Netherlands who didn't know anybody. And the Dutch government really didn't know what to do with all these people. So they took a piece of land and they built a whole bunch, they built housing for all these people who had no place to go. And it became a whole community because many of the people who were leaving, German Jews who were leaving Germany, there were doctors, there were teachers. So it became a whole community. They had a little hospital, they had schools. And the place was called Westerbork. It's in the northern part of the Netherlands. Well, my parents, the more they heard about what was going on in Germany, decided we really have to get my German grandparents out of Germany. So my dad took the train and went and got them and told them they had to come live with us. It was not safe anymore in Germany. And my dad found out that my German grandfather, he'd been arrested 3 times already by the Nazis, but each time somehow he talked his way out of it. So they knew it was high time that they came to live with us. Of course, the Netherlands did not remain neutral very long. We woke up one morning in May of 1940. There were tanks in the streets, soldiers marching in, airplanes overhead, with German soldiers parachuting down. Hitler invaded the Low Countries, Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. We were totally unprepared for this. All of a sudden, we were in the middle of this. Well, the Dutch kind of started to organize right away and tried to fight the Dutch armed forces, this mighty German army. And Hitler didn't expect us. He thought, oh, this is going to be so easy. He could just run over this country and be done. But he didn't expect the resistance that the Dutch people put up against him. And on the 5th day of this invasion, Hitler came in and they bombed our biggest port city of Rotterdam. And he said to the Dutch people, if you do not surrender now, I'm going to bomb every city in the Netherlands. So the Dutch surrendered. The Netherlands is a monarchy. At the time it was Queen Wilhelmina. She left the country with some of her cabinet and set up a government in exile in England. And Hitler chose an Austrian Nazi by the name of Dr. Arthur Seyss-Inquart to now become the commandant of the Netherlands. And very quickly, all the things that have been happening to Jews, especially in Germany, were now beginning to happen to us, the Jews of the Netherlands. I'm going to be technical now. This was just where the Jews lived before the Holocaust. And if you look down, you see the Netherlands. 140,000 Jews lived in the Netherlands at that time. This was from 38 to 39, before even the total influx of the German Jews who escaped and came to the Netherlands. But it became very difficult. The first thing, all the Jews in the Netherlands had to register. So everybody registered. And then very quickly, all these regulations started to come out against us, the Jews. We're Dutch citizens, just like anyone else. My mother, we didn't have supermarkets then, but my mother could not go whenever she wanted to go to the bakery, the meat market, the vegetable market. These are the days that Jewish housewives may go and purchase their groceries. These are the hours and the days you may go. They said, Jews can't have cars. They took our car. Jews can't associate with their Christian friends. So it just, for about a year, all these regulations started to come against us. It was very difficult because all of a sudden we were so restricted. Jews cannot take public transportation, no trains, no buses. We didn't have cars. They took all the adult bicycles. You know, you live in the Netherlands, you have a bicycle. Took all that away from us. My grandfather and my father had to take Germans into the business. When they came in, they fired anyone who worked in government, whether it was, you know, township, the city, the government, province. Anyone who was Jewish was immediately fired. So life became very, very difficult for many, many of us. I was very excited because I was going to start school in the summer of 1941. And I was going to public school, and it was like the school was like over on the next street. And I loved going to school. And my teacher was wonderful. But again, another regulation came out, and it said no Jewish child may attend public school. All Jewish children have to attend a Jewish school. Well, there wasn't one in my town. And I'm just going to see if I have a picture. Oh, this is me. Thank you. This is a photograph just to show you of what my family looked like just at that time that I was talking about. I'm the one with the really cute hairdo. These are photographs of my family, my immediate family. On the left-hand side are my German grandparents. On the right, my Dutch grandparents. On the right, my German grandparents. My father had a sister, her husband, and my 3 little cousins. Just to get an idea of what the place looked like. This was the train station at that time. You can tell by the old cars. Of course, it doesn't look like this anymore. And this was the restaurant, you can see, that my grandfather owned. So, since we had no Jewish schools, the mothers and all the Jewish teachers were fired, principals, administrators, everybody. So some of the teachers and some of the school personnel got together. They rented some rooms in a place and tried to continue our education. So this was one of the rooms that were rented. That's my sister, and my sister went too. They tried to continue our education. Now you look at that photograph, there's only 4 of us who survived. Then, right after that came another regulation, and it said, anyone who is 6 years old and older has to wear the yellow star. You've seen that, and you saw it in the beginning too. And ours, my mother had to buy it then. And it was like on a big piece of cloth. And then she just had to cut them out and sew them on our clothing. Well, I didn't know what it meant. I was 6 years old. I thought this was a big deal, you know, because I'm all grown up now. I can wear, just like all the grown-ups, I can wear the star. Of course, I didn't realize the ramifications of going outside wearing this on your clothing. Because I remember if we went downtown, I had to get off the sidewalk and let people pass. I remember my Dutch grandmother was, at that time, in the hospital. She had a heart attack, and we wanted to go visit her. We had no car, no bike, we couldn't take a bus, so we had to walk. And, you know, I can't remember everything, but I remember that day. It was warm out, and my mother wanted to cut through a park, because it was like a shortcut to the hospital. But there were signs there. It said, "Forbidden for Jews." So my mother said, "Oh, you know, it's kind of warm out. Let's just take off our jackets." So when we took off our jackets, we took off the stars, and fortunately, we were able to walk through the park. No one recognized us, and were able to take the shortcut. Now, my sister was only 4. She didn't have to wear a star, and my mother was so glad. But, you know, if you have little sisters and brothers, or even when you were little, she wanted one too, so she did the temper tantrum thing, and my mother ended up throwing one on her jacket too. All of a sudden, the kids in the neighborhood, the parents said, I don't think you should be seen playing with these Jewish children. So life became very, very difficult for us. My parents were summoned to the synagogue. There was one synagogue in my town, and my parents went, and the rabbi read a letter to the whole congregation. The letter was from the German command, and it said, "We have wonderful news for you. We're going to take you away from the war scene." Because now the war had started. My hometown is like in the middle of the country, and it had a huge train station, and it was very important because many of the trains, every direction, went through this town. My hometown was also a military town, so there were a lot of military bases all the way around. So it was a good place that the Allies were bombing. I remember, you know, the sirens would go off at night, and we had to hide in basements, and they used to sometimes, I don't know what they were called, but it was like this big light thing. They would throw out a plane so they could see down below. Because, you know, in the 1940s, it wasn't like the bombs now. They're now so accurate, and they were just thrown out. So it was very difficult. So it said, the letter said, "We're going to take you away from this war scene. It'll be wonderful. We're going to have trains leaving on this date at this time, and we'd all like you to come to the train station. Here's a list of things you should bring with you. And also make sure you bring me some money and your jewelry. And don't worry about anything in your house. Just close the door, lock it, and we'll watch over all your belongings. And when you return, everything will be there for you." So everybody was like, nobody understood what that meant. There had been rumors. They had been picking up men and taking them to labor camps in Germany. So on the way home, my parents stopped at a Christian friend's house. They had to kind of sneak in his house because we were not allowed to meet them. And my mother happened to look. And on his desk, he had that same letter that had just been read in the synagogue. And she couldn't figure this out. How come he already had a copy of this letter? So she realized it could only be one of two things. He's either a Dutch Nazi, and there was a very large Dutch Nazi movement in the Netherlands, or he was working for the resistance or the underground. So she finally got up enough nerve and she asked him, and he said, "Well, I'll tell you." He said, "I'm working for the underground, the resistance." And he said, "We have been going all over the Netherlands asking Christian families, should the need arise, would they hide Jewish children? Jewish children are our first priority." So he said, "I have an address for you. I have a family who would like to take your children, and I have to know by tomorrow morning. So go home and let me know tomorrow morning what you decide to do." Well, I realize now, being a mother myself, how difficult a decision that must have been to let your 4- and 6-year-old children go. He said, "I cannot tell you where these people live. I cannot tell you who they are. There'll be no contact. And they may survive, they may not, because no one knew what was really going to happen." So my parents thought about it, and they told my sister and I, they decided we should go. So they told my sister and I we were going on vacation. It's going to be so neat, because I think the only thing they told my parents was that it was going to be a farm. So they said, "It's going to be a farm, and the animals." I lived in the city, so we were very excited, and they said, "You'll go for a couple of weeks, and then they will we will go on vacation too, and then in a couple of weeks we'll come to the farm and pick you up and we'll go home. So we were very excited about the whole thing. So my mother packed some things for us, and then the next morning my dad was told where to bring us. Now my parents are no longer alive, so I really don't know why we went to this particular house in the neighborhood. And my dad dropped us off there, and we went, and my sister and I went in the house. And all I remember is my dad saying, "Take very good care of your little sister." We went in the house. It was a very nice family. We had dinner with them, and they put us to bed there. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, they woke us up and they said, hurry up, we have to get dressed. And being good children, we did as we were told. And this is what had to happen. This man, his name was Jan Kanis, who's been recognized as a righteous, he was going to take us to this family who were going to hide us. But we couldn't leave from my hometown, the train station. Remember, all the businesses were there, and everybody knew my sister and I, so they thought it would be best if we left from another town where we would be recognized. So we walked through the woods. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. We left with flashlights. And I remember walking through the woods that morning because I was picking blueberries. They had wild blueberries. And by daylight, we arrived in the next town, and that's where we went on the train, and he took us to this family. The family he took us to lived in an area where they were very, very religious Christians, very poor, and the couple who were willing to take us in had no children. They were in their 60s, and he left us there. And I remember the very first day. There must have been, they'd speak a dialect, they wear traditional costumes, and here are these 2 little girls in their city outfits and don't speak the dialect. And I remember that first day, and it must have been some German soldiers, or there was something going on. They decided they had to hide us real quick. So I remember it was in August, and the wheat had not been cut. I'm little, and the wheat was like just over my head. And I remember them telling me that I had to go into the wheat field with my sister and kind of not walk in straight, kind of zigzag in, and stay in there until they told us to come out. Now, I don't remember if they told us we were playing a game, but they also handed me an umbrella, because it rains a lot in the Netherlands, in case it would rain. So my sister and I are in the middle of this wheat field, and my sister started to cry, because she's only 4 years old. She wanted her mommy. And then it started to rain. So being the bright child that I am, I opened the umbrella way up high. Now you could see this umbrella for about 20 miles all the way around, and a child crying, so they decided this was not going to work. So they took us out, and that very first evening, a couple of their relatives came over to meet us. And I was thrilled, because I remember, I felt I was so grown up because they're asking me questions. And so I told them that I had started school, and I knew how to spell my name, and I knew how to write it. And I wear a star, you know, because I thought this was a big deal. I'm wearing my star. Oh. So then I don't remember the other conversations, what was said. And they left. And that very first night, this couple that had taken us in sat me down, I'm only 6.5 years old, and told me why I was really there. Then I had to tell no one I wore a star, because then I'm admitting that I'm Jewish, and no one is supposed to know I'm Jewish. And this is going to be your story, and you have to remember this. You are now supposed to be our nieces who are bound out of a city, and you're now living with us because you have no place else to go. And your name has been changed, because remember, we had registered, they had all of our names. So since you're our nieces, you're going to take our last name, which is Spronk. And my first name, in English it's pronounced Maud, but in Dutch it's pronounced Maud. And they said your first name is going to be Martia or Margie. So you are now going to be Margie Spronk, and your sister Rita will be Rika Spronk, and we are your aunt and uncle, and you have to call us aunt and uncle. Now in Dutch, aunt is tante, but my sister being so little she couldn't say it, she said Tunny, so all our lives she was Tunny to us. And it really scared me because I'm just a very little girl, and they said if I don't remember this, then I was going to be taken away and killed, and so would they. Because you have to realize when people are willing to hide Jews, they risk their own lives, because it was forbidden to do so. And the Germans would come and take not only the Jews they were hiding, but them too. So they said, you can't go to school because if you go to school, you might tell a classmate something and they make a home and there may be Dutch Nazis. So you can't go to school. You know, I was hidden for 3 years. I don't think they got truant officers, but I found out later on that most of the people really knew who we really were. And it was very, very hard because I had to stay inside. I couldn't go out because I had to remember this. And because they said, anyone who stops you, you got to remember who you now are. And I was so scared because I knew that something might happen if I did not remember all this correctly. One day after church, we went to visit Aunt's widowed sister on another farm. And my sister and I were so happy because you know what? Who was hiding on that farm but my Jewish kindergarten teacher from my hometown and her husband? Somebody we knew. So we were so excited. So we would go every Sunday after church. And she was beginning to teach us how to read and write. And then one day we didn't go anymore. And I really never knew what happened. Until maybe 10 years ago, I found out what happened. There were people, Dutch people, who, for whatever, whether it was food or money, would betray people saying, I know there's Jews hidden in that house, and they would go, and if they found Jews there, these people would be paid. So there was a price on our heads too. So what happened was someone betrayed their hiding place. A truck with German soldiers came on Aunt's sister's farm, exactly to that haystack where they were hiding underneath, took them out and said to Aunt's sister, we're taking your son. The son was maybe, I think, 19 or 20 at the time. And she said, no, you have to take me because it's my farm. No, we're taking him. So they took the three of them and they were going to take him to the next village where evidently they had also found other Jews that day. They were going to process them. And then they were going to be put on a train to Westerbork. Remember when I first told you about all the German refugees who had come and they had built them this place that became like a little village? Well, when the Germans invaded the Netherlands, they said, we have all these Jews right here. So they built a fence around it. And throughout the whole war years, it became a transit camp. As they found Jews, they would send them there, and from there, once a week, trains went to the concentration camps. So they were going to take my teacher and her husband, and they were going to go there. Fortunately, the young man, the son of Aunt's sister, was able to be released. But that very first night they were in that facility, Dutch Nazis came, marched them outside to a park. Not only my teacher and my husband and 4 other men, and had them dig their own graves. And from what I heard later, my teacher objected to this. And she said, you're not supposed to be doing this. Because they knew what was going to happen. We're supposed to go to Westerbork. She didn't know either that what was happening at Westerbork. At that same moment when she said that, they shot her, her husband, and the 4 other men, and covered up the graves. Now the next morning, the Germans are looking for these 6 people. They can't find them. Where are they? Somehow they got wind of what happened the night before. They got hold of those Dutch Nazis. They marched them out to that park to dig up their bloody bodies that had been shot the night before, so they could put them on the train to Westerbork so that they were accounted for. Another day they sent my sister and I away for the day, and you know, I guess I asked a lot of questions. I knew something had happened, so that evening they decided they better share with me what had happened. So at dusk they took me outside. You had to be very careful because there were German soldiers. I mean, there were no private cars. The farm was on the highway, so there was nothing but army vehicles moving. And the Germans had set up this huge guns right on the farm, and they were shooting at the airplanes, the Allied planes that were coming over for bombing runs. So they took me outside and they looked around to make sure no one was around. And they took me to one of the barns, which had like an extended roof. And there was all this wood there because we had no gas or electric and everything was done with wood. So, and it was all open on one side. There was nobody there, so they cleared away the wood, and there was this trap door. So they opened the trap door, and I looked in, and there was a young boy hiding in there. He was about 17. And he had like a mattress, candles, and I didn't know who he was. And I found out many years later who he was. He lived in Amsterdam with his mother, father, and 2 little brothers. His father had already been taken to one of the labor camps in Germany. And they did not go on the trains. They were just hoping that maybe they could just stay in their apartment. And it was like in the middle of the night, they heard a truck, and they looked out the apartment window, and they saw a truck and German soldiers getting out. And they knew they were going to come and get them. So he said to his mother, he said, you know what? The apartment next door is empty. And he knew how to get in there through, I don't know how, but somehow from his apartment, they could get into that apartment. And he said, why don't we all go into that apartment? Then they'll break down the door eventually and find there's nobody here in the apartment to take. And they'll go away. She said, no, I don't think so. She said, if you want to do that, you go ahead. So he did. And she stayed in the apartment, and of course she and the 2 little boys, his little brothers, were taken. After everything got very quiet, he came back into the apartment to take a few things, and he knew where he wanted to go. Because he was now 17, and maybe when he was 12, 13, he had had an opportunity as a city child to spend 2 weeks in the summer on a farm, and he had been on the farm where we were now. And he had always kept in contact with our new aunt and uncle. So he thought, I know if I can get there, they will hide me. So on his way out of town, he took off his star, and he knew exactly where his mother and his little brothers were taken. And it was like a theater that they converted into a holding place. And just as he arrived, they were just taking his little brothers out for a walk, and he goes, psst, psst, come with me. And they said, no, we want to stay with Mommy. So they stayed, and obviously they were murdered. So he left, he got to the farm. And unbeknownst to us, he was hiding in one of the barns. And evidently he found out one of his friends from Amsterdam was being hidden on a neighboring farm. So he thought he'd like to go see his friend. So the other person that lived with us besides Aunt and Uncle was Aunt's brother, who was a deaf mute, really couldn't speak or hear. And he had a little sign on the back of his bicycle indicating that he couldn't speak or hear. So this young man, his name was Mo, took that bicycle, and he's pedaling on the highway, and he got stopped by German soldiers. And he didn't know what to do, he had no ID. So he pretended that he couldn't speak or hear, and finally after about 10 minutes they got sick and tired of him, they let him go. And he came back to the farm, and that's when they decided they really had to hide him out of sight. He couldn't just be in one of the barns anymore. So they said to me, you bring him something to eat once a day. But because Aunt and Uncle were out all day working the farm, but you have to be very careful that nobody sees you. So everything was fine, and one day I had gone to bring him something to eat, and I came back up, and there were half a dozen German soldiers just standing there, watching. Well, it was so obvious with a trap door open and me coming out of the ground of what this was. And I didn't know what to do. I'm maybe 7.5 years old at the time, so I pretended they weren't there. So I just put the pot down, put the trap door down, covered it with the wood, picked up the pot, and I had to turn my back. And I prayed because I was for sure that I was going to be shot right then and there. But nothing happened. When Aunt and Uncle returned that late afternoon, I told them what happened. And they said, well, it's not safe anymore because these soldiers didn't do anything, but they're going to tell the superior officer. They're going to come back and get him. Well, they didn't know who it was, but whoever was hiding there. And they're going to get all of us. And I was so scared, but nothing ever happened. And I realized then that among all this evil, here were half a dozen German soldiers who were not like the Nazis. They had been drafted into the army, had families of their own, and really never said anything and saved our lives. another day we were, my sister and I were in the farm, and two strangers came in. And they took us, they said, "You're leaving right now, this minute." Well, I found out later on what happened. They had been warned that someone had revealed who we were. And they had been warned that they were going to come and get us. So we left with these people. They took us to another safe house where we spent the night, and we were taken to yet another family. And this family lived in a little medieval fishing village. And they had a daughter, Yo, who's still alive today. And that was, I didn't know when it was, and this was, we went into hiding in August of 1942. It's now right after Christmas in 1944. And it was a horrible, horrible time. That was the winter in the Netherlands. That was the hunger winter. There was nothing to eat for any of us. All the food that was grown and raised was taken from us and for the German army or sent to Germany. 20,000 people died of starvation. I remember even while we were still on the farm, people would come from cities to the farms and try and get food. And I remember sometimes in the dead of winter, going outside and finding people who had arrived during the night just frozen to death. So it was a horrible, horrible winter. Nobody was going to school then, so we weren't that conspicuous because there was no wood to heat the classroom, no teachers. So it was a very tough winter. With nothing to eat, we used to go out and catch bugs, pull off the legs and put a little stick through it and make a little fire and roast them and eat them. Or sometimes we were lucky, we were able to find some fish. But the saving grace in this village was that these were fishermen. And they fished in now a lake. It used to be a sea until it was closed off. And most of the fish died because it went from salt water to fresh water. There was only one fish that really survived and continued to multiply, that they went and fished every day, and that's what we had cooked for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Any idea what the fish could have been? One time a little boy, he was so excited, he said, I know. I said, what is it? He said, eel. I said, you're right, how did you know that? And he said, I heard you speak before. And I remember, those years, there were no toys. I didn't know when it was my birthday. To this day, I really don't even know what childhood diseases I've had. I know I never had the German measles because I got that when I was 19. So I knew that was one thing I missed as a child. So it was very difficult. There were no toys, nothing. I remember one night while we were still on the farm, the whole neighborhood decided to slaughter a pig. And it had to be done very quietly. Pigs squeal a lot. He had to be killed instantly. And they had it on a ladder and they were cutting up the meat. My sister and I were so excited because we didn't have any toys. There was one part of that pig that we wanted because it was going to work. Any idea what it could have been? A head? Tail? No. No? 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 Talk about inside. The bladder. Well, think about it. We dried it out and we could blow it up and we had a ball to play with. I mean, you think about all the toys that you've had as a child and that you have now. Here with two little girls who used the bladder as the ball. Anyway, someone said no one was allowed to have a radio. The only thing that you saw were just placards it was all propaganda of how wonderful the Germans were. And someone said, there was an invasion in France. And it was months earlier, and of course, I never went to school. I'm almost 90 years old. Where in the world is France? But it sounded so good that maybe we were going to be free. And as you know, there was the invasion in Normandy, and troops started to move in different directions and went through Belgium and freed also the southern part of the Netherlands. But then the Germans put up a great deal of resistance right where all the rivers went through. And we were north of that. But eventually they broke through and they said, they're coming. Most of the Netherlands was freed by Canadians. And they said, they're coming. They've already freed the village just before. All the German soldiers left the village. And everybody was so excited because we knew we were going to be free so soon. So everybody put out their flags and found anything that was orange because the royal family is the House of Orange. So it's a national color. We were all celebrating already. but the German soldiers returned. And they were not happy to see that we were celebrating. So there was a lot of shooting, just at random, at anything, and everybody. And then they left again. And then people went out and retrieved their dead and wounded. And we all stayed in the house. And we lived in the apartment on the second floor. And they had told me, if I look out the window, I could look right where they told me the tanks were going to come. Because people had heard it. They were putting their ears on this dike that went around this lake. That's where they were coming. So I'm looking out the window, and all of a sudden I saw a truck come in with men in blue coveralls. And right after that came the tanks with the Canadian soldiers. Well, I get teary-eyed every time I mention this, because it was the most wonderful sight that a little girl has ever seen in her whole life. I'm 9 years old, and here come these soldiers on their tanks. Well, people went crazy. And I'm sure you've seen pictures climbing all over the tanks, and oh my gosh, it was such a celebration to realize we were just like that, we were free. The men in the blue coveralls, I found out years later, were Dutch resistance fighters who were with the Canadians, and they knew that the village was safe, so gave them the honor of coming into the village first. And Yo, the daughter of the second family, who's still alive today, she told me the story. She said that one of the soldiers offered me a chocolate bar. Well, I've had no candies or anything, I didn't know what it was, so I just didn't want to take it. So he unwrapped it. I still didn't know what it was. So she said, she knew what it was, so she said she broke off a piece and just shoved it in my mouth. And I went, I really like chocolate. So then they said, well, there had been no contact with my parents, other than at one point someone, while we were still on the farm, wrote a note in pencil, because I couldn't read or write. And I'll show you a copy of it. And it was in pencil, and then they gave me a bottle of ink and a pen, and then I traced all the letters. And then when it was dry, they erased the pencil. So it really looked like I had written this note. And somehow it was able, my parents got this note, which was probably in the winter of 1944, 43, 44. So at that point, my parents still knew we were alive, because there was no contact. My parents, after my sister and I left, had no place to go. And that very first evening after my sister and I had left, Christian friends snuck into the house and said to them, well, why don't you stay with us? They had like a car dealership in my hometown, and they had like a showroom in the front and a service area for cars in the back, and they lived above in the apartment. And they said, there's only one little problem. Since, remember I mentioned, my hometown was a military town, and many German officers had no place, so they would just even ring a doorbell in the house and tell people, you've got 2 hours to clear out of your house, it's not our house. Or in this particular apartment, there were 2 German officers living in one of the bedrooms. My parents had no place to go, so they took them up on their offer. So my parents lived in their attic for 3 years. My dad could never go outside because he would be recognized, because it's my hometown. He grew up there. And the second thing was that there was no one his age, he was young, men who were walking on the street, because the Germans were taking all the Dutch young boys too. So he could never go outside. My mother would go out dressed as a nurse and try to get food for them and the 2 people, their friends, who were hiding them as much, and also at times delivered messages for the underground, because they had quite an operation. But my parents survived. And they were told their children survived, except their children didn't remember them. So somehow they decided, instead of staying in the fishing village, we should go back on the farm with Aunt and wait there. And I remember the day my parents arrived, evidently because, first of all, as the Germans retreated, all the bridges were blown up. The only movement was trucks with food, because the whole country was suffering from malnutrition. So they hitchhiked. I don't even know how long it took them, but they appeared on the farm. And I remember we didn't have running water then, they had a pump, and it was a pump room. And I remember standing there with Aunt. I'm on her right side, my sister on her left. And these 2 people were standing in the doorway, a man and a woman. I don't know who they were. And Aunt said to me, these are your parents. Why don't you shake their hand? So I did, and then immediately retreated back to hide behind her. Because I didn't know these people, and I guess my parents just assumed we'd be so happy to see them and we'd just all go home together, but it didn't work that way. So they stayed for a little bit, so we could get used to them. So I took my dad to one of the barns where I had some other toys that no one knew about, and then that was kind of hidden. No one even, while we were gone those 4 months, no one even knew where that was. So I took my dad, because I was so proud of what I had collected. Well, I had collected a lot of spent ammunition. It was lying all over the place. You know, it was everywhere. There was a lot of shooting going on and everything else, and it was just, I thought it was all spent ammunition. Obviously, nobody checked what I had. So I very proudly showed my father this little shelf where I had all these nice things, and I think my poor man almost had a heart attack. Seems that I had like live grenades, you know, everything I found, I collected. How would I know? I remember, you know, he looked at me like, what? Of course, I never saw it again. But many of my friends who would find this stuff, it was everywhere, were injured because we started playing with these things. As the Germans retreated, they landmined everything. To this day, I mean, it's more than 70 years later, I'm still afraid to walk in the woods thinking of landmines. So after a while, I said to my parents, okay, you know what? I'll go home with you. But if we don't like living with you, we're coming back and living with Aunt. So we went back. Our house, amazingly enough, there was nothing left in our house. What was happening? As Jews were leaving, going into hiding, or were being picked up, a big moving van, you know, like American Van Lines and United Van Lines that you have here. They had a company in Holland called Pulse, P-U-L-S-E, who were hired by the Germans to then go into this house that the Jews just left, take everything out, and then it was shipped to Germany. And that's what happened to all of our stuff. And they actually became, the name of the company actually became a verb. They said you were pulsed, knowing that this particular truck had come and taken all your belongings, gone. So we walked into a house where there was, first of all, you had no window panes because of all the bombing and shooting, and all the wood was gone. You know, there were no wood floors anymore because the house was abandoned for 3 years and people came in and needed firewood. So they took everything out of the house to use to heat their homes. So it was very difficult, and I remember that Canadian soldiers set up a soup kitchen at the top of the street, and they gave my mother a big pot, 4 bowls, 4 spoons, because we couldn't cook, or we had nothing. And she would go up there 3 times a day, and it was always like breakfast with some kind of a milk thing with biscuits in it, and it was always something that was like a soup or something. And it was interesting because the house that the Canadian soldiers were in at the top of my street was a mansion that belonged to Audrey Hepburn's family. Many, many years ago, they lived there. So anyway, now I had to start school. I'm 9 years old. I've never been to school. And it was quite a rude awakening to be in the 1st grade at the age of 9. And they spoke a proper Dutch, and I spoke this dialect. And everybody made fun of my sister and I, like, oh, you're a bunch of hicks, you know, you can't even talk the language. And it was very hard to adjust to that, and to adjust living with another family who were all these horrific stories. And we kept waiting and waiting, and I'll never forget the day my mother got the letter from the Dutch Red Cross informing her that taken to this transit camp, Westerbork, in the Netherlands. From there they were put on trains to a death camp called... They arrived. They actually even brought the train tracks from the little town Sobibor into this camp, which was out in the woods. And people, you know, had been on the train. They'd get off the train and they'd say, oh, here are the porters, they'll take your luggage, and we're just going to take you. You've been on the train for 3 or 4 days. And only because people cared enough to risk their lives to save them. Are there any questions at this point? Yes? What happened to my aunt? Well, Uncle died while we were there during the war. I forgot that little part. One evening in January, so we stayed. And so after the war, we always, my sister and I would spend all our vacations with her. And when we knew we were going to immigrate to the United States in 1950, we didn't know the United States in April of 1950, so we never had to tell her. However, there are many nieces and nephews, and Miss Santiago has met some of the nieces and nephews. I have that whole family, the righteous, people who helped the Jews during the war, from any country, not only the Netherlands. And there are many trees that were planted at that time, also in their honor. But now the families who saved my sister and I are being honored this summer. What they did during the Second World War. So I'm very, very excited about that that's finally happening, to recognize them. Any other questions? Yes?
Was it hard enough to live after the war?
Yes, it was very hard, you know.